Hi guys, it's me, Arden Lee. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about releasing the need to prove yourself. This is something that I believe I referenced in the last video, and I said I was going to expand upon that concept because the need to prove oneself comes from the place of defensiveness that I was talking about in the last video. And I recently had a pretty big space created for a new way of being. And I am making an attempt to get more into alignment with that. About a week ago, I did a plant medicine journey very intentionally with a new friend of mine. I had been gifted some plant medicine and really felt that I was being called to share that. And the first ping I got was with this person who has now really become a very cool friend. And it was really useful and helpful for me having that space held for me to have all of this come through. So I want to talk about a little bit about what I downloaded during that journey and how that's showing up for me right now, in the hopes that perhaps it can be useful for you too. I very much recognize that the gift of being able to explain things is something that certainly came from my trauma history, right? I was in many situations where I wasn't believed, or where I really had to use my mind, my logic, my rhetoric, my way of being able to make certain things make sense to people as a defense mechanism against abuse, or as a means of being believed about the abuse that was happening. Explaining things became a really terrific gift. The gift of knowing what sort of metaphor to translate something into. A gift of relating one thing to another thing in order to make people understand them better. Is something I'm very grateful for. And it's not only something that came from my trauma, but also something that has been incredibly useful on my journey, because so much, ironically, right? This was like a trauma response at first. But so much of my soul mission in passing this information along is aided and guided by the fact that I'm very good at explaining things and translating things into words. I can explain concepts in ways that many people will understand, especially the mechanics of how they function, that I've seen a lot of those concepts out there before, that just sort of get glossed over, or kind of taken for granted, and therefore often don't land in the same way to those of us who need to be able to understand the mechanics of how they function in order to really fully embrace and embody them, right? So this is a great gift, and I'm very thankful for it. However, I'm noticing that there's a lot of times that I'm still using this gift from a place of unworthiness. It's something that I said to my friend as we were on this journey together, was I mentioned how so often throughout my life I will learn another person's language, quote unquote, not necessarily their native language, but rather the field in which things are going to make sense to them in order to communicate the thing that I need to communicate to them. Because unless I can translate my point into their language so that they understand it, I very much feel like I'm not going to be heard. Whew, right? And what this ends up looking like is, if you can imagine what was presented to me, what I saw was, it's kind of like the Pink Floyd logo, right? When you see that white beam of light hit the prism and then it bursts into a rainbow on the other side. If that white light is the source knowledge and I'm the prism, and as that prism, I can translate it into any color that is necessary for that situation. I'll give you a few examples because I understand I'm talking about things in the abstract right now. Earlier this year, for example, there was an incident with a facilitator that blew up a little bit at the time, where they did not hold a trauma-informed container, and there was some accidental harm that happened. And my desire was to try and hold the space for this person to hear where they were making a mistake and where they could possibly do better. So what I did is I took what I learned and I used their own sales script as a means of translating where they could hold a higher vision for themselves and where they could stand to improve. And I want to sit with how much love and effort I put into that, even though it was hard for me, even though my desire to be heard may have still been coming from a place of lack of safety, right? If you don't hear me, I feel unsafe. I feel unsafe because you're going around being an influential person who doesn't realize the importance of harm reduction and trauma sensitivity. And since I can translate this, I'm going to take it upon myself to put this into a language that you can understand, right? So that's one example. But there have been other examples too. There have been times where I've wanted to have conversations with people in the music industry where those conversations were not really quite open and available. And I ended up putting them into song. And that's also great because that benefits me too. I'm inspired, right, by this thing that that I want to say, but maybe I can't quite say for whatever reason because it doesn't feel like there's space to say that. So I'm like, well, I'll just put it here and I'll leave it here because I know you're going to come across it. There's also, there's also benefit to this for me too, because in applying my genius to learn the language of another person, I also end up learning it, right? So let's say that, like, let me give an abstract example. Let's say that it's kind of like Gordon Ramsay wants to come over to my house, and I decide to make him dinner, right? Because just the act of having to think about how to make a dinner for someone like Gordon Ramsay would already elevate my cooking skills, right? Just that challenge. And certainly Gordon's feedback and that experience, it's a great learning experience and it's amazing. It's sort of like I'm going around with all these different people and their skill sets and I'm learning their language. And it's like, I feel like Thanos with all the Infinity Stones, right? Which are also a rainbow, right? That there's that source and then there's all of the different ways that it can be expressed. It's very shapeshifter energy. It's very Loki energy, which is also, one of my gifts. It's funny. Loki is thought of as a trickster. He is a trickster. People are a little afraid of him because they're not sure, they can't necessarily trust that he's not going to calculate something that they're not going to anticipate, right? That's going to be to their detriment. But that same energy, that trickstery energy of shapeshifting can be so generous because you're doing what you need to do to see people and meet them in the language that they're speaking in, right? So I'm relating all of this to the friend who's with me on this journey, and it felt really good to have him turn to me and say, wow, I see how hard you're working. It's a privilege to witness your genius. And what if you didn't? What if you didn't do this? And I thought about it. And again, I saw, well, this is a gift. I don't want to get rid of it entirely. This ability to explain and translate things. But I've been taking myself for granted, putting so much effort into this so that people will hear me and understand me and hopefully meet me in that understanding of things that are important to me, of things that it feels like if this person doesn't end up understanding this, then maybe there's a potential for harm there. Or even if there's not, you know, I also think of this summer, you know, meeting my co-creator Giulio Gelemi, who co-created the music video for Another Year of Rain with me. And I was so inspired in seeing him dance to challenge myself. You know, he's a professional dancer. And while I have some dance in my background, I'm not anywhere nearly as good as he is. So there was also something inspiring about saying, let's do some dance sequences in this video. I want to inspire myself to, I'm not going to be able to play at your level without a lot of practice, but let me see if I can rise to the challenge and start to understand, and start to, you know, in a way sort of download a bit of an understanding of your skill set, right? So let me see if I can meet you on that playing field a little bit. And that wasn't coming from a place of lack of safety as much as it was inspiration, and also a desire for there to be some kind of comfort and empathy, right? Well, let's go there. Let's meet on that field together. And that's been really cool. So it's not always a negative thing, but what I realized I've been taking for granted in myself is the fact that I will do this sometimes for people who aren't necessarily open to hearing me, or who don't value it as the gift that it is, who don't see me doing all of this translating and putting all of this stuff together behind the scenes just so they can hear me in the way that is most comfortable for them. I've been doing this when they haven't, and I've been taking myself for granted for it. And it's coming from a need to be heard that is, in essence, one and the same as the need for me to prove myself. From that place of defensiveness, from that place of, if I'm not heard, then I'm not safe. And I want that to not be true for me anymore. And I'm also, you guys, for as much as I love making videos and I love writing long posts and I love language and I love speaking and I love explaining things, I'm getting to a point where I'm a little tired of hearing myself talk so much. It's ironic as I'm in minute 14 of this video, right? But there are times that I notice myself trying so hard to find a balance between, let me tell this story in a concise way that makes sense, and also let me make sure that I'm including all of the background and all the details that led to all these conclusions. And sometimes I feel like it all becomes a lot. Maybe it's not so necessary. And I'm looking forward to coming into more stillness and quiet. I'm looking forward to just being in the energy of being. And not having to prove anything, and simply letting my energy, my endorsement, letting my being vote with where I put my energy, rather than needing to explain to where I feel that there's something wrong. Now, there's still a lot of injustice in the world, right? So how can I make a balance of that? How can I not just tacitly permit injustice where I see it, versus where, do I move out of the energy of having to prove something around it? I'll figure that out, I'm sure. But something that showed up for me really strongly, that I also want to share in this, kind of mirroring where I was taking myself for granted, was also, I basically said to my partner on the journey, my friend who was journeying with me, as I was realizing this and realized how much I was taking myself for granted in speaking all these different languages just to be heard, I said, how ironic is it that I'm seeing a man who speaks English as his second or third language right now, and who not only speaks English as his second or third language, but who doesn't even prefer language as language. Spoken language, written language, is not his forte. He is far more right-brained than left-brained. And his language, his primary language, is embodiment, reading subtle body cues, picking up on energy. And it hit me, because we're long distance, it hit me what a gift it was. I said, that essentially here I am taking myself for granted for speaking all these languages, and then also taking for granted that this man is showing up with me and staying in touch with me and connecting with me mainly via text message in my own native language. So my native language that I speak, as well as my preferred language of written communication. And I didn't realize how much of an imbalance there was there, and I didn't realize how much I was taking that for granted. And it hit me really big at that point, and I was like, wow, I can't believe I missed what a gift that is, how much effort there is there. So I resolved to do better and to work on evening out that imbalance and to put more appreciation for him in that, which feels good. Like, oh wow, cool, a place that I can show up better, good. And at the same time, I'm going to look at that mirror, and I'm also going to appreciate myself for where I'm doing that for so many people just to be heard. And I'm going to call my energy back from it. And I'm just going to know what I know. I'm going to be discerning about where I choose to use that energy and bandwidth, and to make sure that the effort that I'm putting into it is worthwhile and it's being received and appreciated. Because otherwise, I'm trying to prove myself to people who really don't see me or care about it in the first place. And what am I doing? That's still coming from a place of defensiveness, from needing the world to be a certain way. Certainly, I want the world to be a certain way. I want to speak up about what's important. But I've been putting a lot of effort into that has been unseen and unreceived. And I'm ready to let that go. I'm ready to correct that imbalance too. So there we have it. Being in the energy of proving oneself versus just being in the energy of being and knowing. My friend on the journey with me called it seeing versus being. He was like, Arden, you're a seer. That's your gift. You can see things very clearly. But what if you removed yourself from needing to see everything all the time, watching the matrix go by? And what if you were just in the energy of being, in your embodied knowledge? And I think I'd be a lot quieter. And that to me feels really powerful. So I say this here as a means of transparency, as a means of accountability, as a means of inspiring you in case you also see yourself in this paradigm and you feel called to also download that same information and make the same change. And thank you for witnessing me. Thank you for seeing my commitment to my own next level of growth. thank you for being on this path with me as well. Appreciate you guys. I'll see you next time.